Rippy? Hello, my fruit-battered yet perfectly framed friends. Arlo here, and today we're reviewing new Pokemon Snap. Way back in the year 1999, I played a little game called Pokemon Snap, and I played it an awful lot. I ran through each course dozens, if not hundreds of times, learning every little secret and interaction. I meticulously shot each and every Pokemon to get the highest scores possible. Though, honestly, I probably spent half my time giving Charmanders apples so they would bend over and it would look like they were tossing their cookies. I was, clever child. Anyway, despite Pokemon Snap being such a delightful game, the Pokemon Company didn't seem too eager to make a new one. Nintendo systems with motion controls and cameras and everything came and went, and even when it seemed like the time was supremely ripe, they still wouldn't budge. But after 22 years, they finally did it. Here in the year 2021, we have our new Pokemon Snap. But going into the game, I must admit, I was a little nervous. I was so receptive to the idea of a new game for so many years. But now, I'm old and jaded, the world is weird, and the name Pokemon itself doesn't elicit the same fuzzy feeling it used to in me. I felt a little like Molly Grew in The Last Unicorn. Where were you 20 years ago? 10 years ago? Where were you when I was new? I just didn't know if I really wanted a new Pokemon Snap, or if I only thought I did because I used to. And that, my friends, is why we are here today, to answer the question, is recommending this game a snap? Is it a picture-perfect sequel? Is this picture worth 1,000 words? Is it a focused effort? Did it capture my attention? I could probably go on, but I'll just stop there. Whoosh! New Pokemon Snap's story setup is decently clever. Instead of just saying, let's take some pictures just to do it, the game establishes a new narrative throughline all about the strange Illumina phenomenon. Something on this collection of islands comprising the Lental region makes Pokemon glow. This provides impetus for the story, an overarching mystery to solve, and even some interesting mechanical ideas. It's nice to have this whole Illumina thing, but don't expect too much from the story. It's alright, and there's some decently interesting stuff, especially near the end, but it doesn't stray too far from let's just take some pictures. But does it need to? Does Pokemon Snap need a deep story? Probably not. This works fine. I do wish they didn't have to include the twerpy, jealous little rival trope, though. Does anyone actually enjoy characters like that? Is this supposed to be entertaining? On the field, the gameplay is quite familiar. You're a kid, and a professor guy has tasked you with studying Pokemon. Each level has you moving slowly along a fixed path, messing with the local wildlife and snapping pictures. Even after over 20 years, the basic idea of Pokemon Snap has not changed, and that's certainly not a bad thing. You've still got apples to throw, though now it's explicitly explained how they're light and airy and they're called fluff fruit, which is an obvious attempt to make it seem less mean when you pelt a Pokemon in the head with one. In a similar move, now instead of pester balls, which were literally invented to bother Pokemon with, you've got Illumina balls, which make a happy, magical little poof and cause the Pokemon to glow pleasantly. I thought that was pretty funny. And these are interesting because you never know how a Pokemon is going to react when you use one, versus just, getting upset. Once again, you can play music, which can make Pokemon wake up or dance or whatever they want. Then I'd say the main addition to the moment-to-moment gameplay is the scan ability. This allows you to locate an ID Pokemon, get info about your surroundings, trigger alternate paths, and it can even get some Pokemon's attention. It's quite versatile, and it's a pretty good new feature. Though I will say, I feel compelled to always scan everything possible so I don't miss anything new, but that means I'm frequently distracted by old information I'm given every time I run through a level. I don't need to know about a patch of flowers or some ruins every single time. A couple other small gameplay changes. Now you can move the cursor with the left stick and the overall camera with the right, and moving both makes you turn extra fast, which is nice. Even nicer is the ability to quick turn. Very useful, thank you. This isn't quite related to the gameplay, but another new thing is commentary from the other characters. They talk to you while you're out on the field. The regular banter is whatever, maybe even a little distracting sometimes, but they always point out when you take shots worth a lot of points. It's pretty silly, but something about it makes the act of taking pictures a little more satisfying. It's just a fun little feedback thing, I guess. I mean, who doesn't like to be complimented on their technique? Speaking of technique, let's talk about the process of submitting your pics at the end of a run. In addition to being scored based on angle and size and positioning and all that, pictures can now be awarded between 1 and 4 stars. This was a little confusing at first, but basically the two systems are totally different. Scores are all about getting a perfect textbook shot of a Pokémon. The stars are all about how interesting a Pokémon's pose is and what kind of situation you captured them in. A rough example is 1 star for a basic pose, 2 stars for eating a fluff fruit, 3 stars for dancing to your music box, and 4 stars for engaging in a unique interaction with another Pokémon. Usually somewhere along those lines, but they're all different. In a small way, this does sort of remove a bit of the feel of nailing that one perfect shot. These pictures can be terrible as long as you capture the behavior at least somewhat visibly, and it kinda gamifies the Pokémon. It makes it feel less natural by forcing you to imagine each Pokémon as having 4 distinct behaviors that the game is looking for. However, that's a small gripe, because what this system loses in feel, it gains many times over in fun. Now, to fill out your photo decks, you've got to get 4 pics of each Poke instead of just 1. And for someone like me who isn't quite interested in perfecting my timing and angle to rack up a high score anymore, this still gives me something to do and work toward. The game makes this whole picture evaluation process quite pleasant by streamlining the entire thing. Now your picks are all sorted by Pokémon, and it lets you know if you've nabbed a pick with a star rating you haven't nabbed before. Professor Mirror unfortunately doesn't seem to have as much to say about your pictures as Oak did, which is a little weird. A few more unique phrases would have gone a long way toward immersion. But luckily you can just hold down A and get through all the evaluating real quick if you're in a hurry. Going into New Pokémon Snap, I think the #1 question on people's minds was, just how much content is it going to have? Shorter games were more common back in the day, and were usually full price regardless of length. But even then, the first Pokémon Snap kind of pushed the limits of how short a game could be when it cost $50, 80 adjusted for inflation. It had a handful of levels, and each one took a couple minutes to run through, and the idea was to play each one again and again to find all the interactions and score the best picks. New Pokémon Snap has the same format, but fortunately you're looking at a lot more content overall. There are more levels than in the original game. Not really that much more, honestly, but a good amount more. As in the original, the courses are still very short, but that fits with the formula, so it's not really a problem. These courses, once again, have small alternate paths to find and open up, so that's nice. Also, gaining new abilities makes returning to earlier areas very worthwhile. And in fact, this game takes the idea further by requiring that you snap a picture of a glowing Illumina flower before Professor Mirror can create Illumina balls for use on each island. It's a very small detail, and it rarely takes long to get each one, but it's a little extra bit of progression and player agency that I really appreciate. There are 2 main ideas that New Pokémon Snap introduces to the series in order to increase replayability, though. The first is having day and night versions of several levels. You'll find a lot of different Pokémon between day and night, and when you find the same Pokémon, they're basically always showing off different behaviors. Second, this game introduces a level system. The courses all have their own XP bars, and when they level up, they introduce small changes. I will admit, this system is a little clumsy. You can scale the level of a course up or down when you enter, but it's hard to keep track of the changes, and I always wonder if I'm missing something important that's exclusive to level 1 or 2 because I've been keeping it at level 3 because that's the latest one I earned, and I don't know if I should be messing with it. I feel like the very concept of scaling back down isn't something the player should have to mess with, because all it does is confuse the process of hunting down a specific Pokémon behavior and create anxiety about missing something. However, leveling is still a really cool addition, because it adds yet another layer of progression to the game, which is just satisfying in its own right, and obviously increases replayability and overall content load even further. So I'm a little iffy on the execution, but for the most part, it's a cool concept. Between all that and the draw of filling out your photo decks with 4 different behavioral variants for each Pokémon, New Pokémon Snap feels much meatier than its predecessor. And it's meatier still when you consider another new feature, requests. Characters will ask you to grab a shot of something very specific, usually a particular behavior that's tricky to find. This feature right here is one of my favorite additions. In any game, I love having a list of quests, challenges, etc. to work through, as it just gives you something to do. The first game was mostly just about getting each Pokemon, but now in addition to the new star system, you've got a fun list of goals to achieve as well. These requests also help guide you toward unique behaviors you might need for your album, like little hints. And you're often rewarded with stamps and stuff to use on your pictures, so there's a fun collection element as well. However, this system is also very frustrating. Maybe I'm just bad at the game, but I have a really hard time filling requests most of the time. The game gives you little screenshots of where you might find what you're looking for, but even knowing what I need and where to find it, I'll throw fluff fruit and Illumina orbs every which way and do everything I can think to do, and nothing will work. I've heard people say that I need to lead Pokemon around using fluff fruit more, but by the time a Pokemon sees that I've thrown one, walks up to it, and eats it, I'm already too far away to do anything else. Despite how much I love the concept of requests, I've actually only completed a small fraction of them. Making matters worse, these requests can be really finicky to trigger, and you'll take what seems like the perfect picture, only for the game to tell you that it's just not right for some reason. You also have to remember to manually select your pictures during evaluation, and the game doesn't notify you if you've got something good, and as usual, you can only pick one single shot and have to just cross your fingers and hope you got it right, or you have to do the run all over again. And you can only fill requests after getting them, and sometimes you don't get them until you've already captured the picture you need, and now you just have to do it again. Then there's the issue I mentioned earlier where you never know what level you should set a course to in order to make a request doable, so there's always this feeling that maybe you're not looking in the right place after all. It's wonky. And it kind of leads us into another thing about New Pokemon Snap. While the game is better than the first in almost every way, it does kind of seem like less interesting stuff happens on the field. I remember making the Pokemon do all sorts of crazy stuff in the first game, but here it's less than I think I expected. Making Pokemon evolve, for instance, was a big part of the game before, but I haven't even done it once in this one. I can't necessarily say the game doesn't have a ton of interesting interactions, because reading the request list, it sounds like most of them are probably just locked behind these requests. So I'll have to do a good bit more digging and practicing, and maybe just looking up some answers online, honestly, if I want to see more cool stuff. Also, I don't know if this game has any Pokemon signs like in the first one, where you can find images of Pokemon in the world itself. But if it does, I haven't found any, and that's pretty disappointing. I was hoping there would be even more fun stuff like that to look out for. We have two more new things to talk about. The first is the ability to share pictures online. Back in my day, we had to take our cartridge to Blockbuster to print out our pictures and manually hand them to our friends to share them, if you can believe it. I never actually got to do that, but man, did I want to. Well, nowadays we can post whatever we want online and anyone can see it. I haven't messed with this a lot, but it's basically everything you would want from such a feature. You can see random popular pics, see what your friends are up to, create your own little player card with some of your favorite shots, and most importantly, make your pics really silly with a bunch of stamps and stuff. You can even see how your total Photodex score stacks up against those of your peers, which adds a fun little competitive edge to the experience if you're into that kind of thing. And finally, one of my favorite new things in New Pokemon Snap. If I were at the round table when all the designers were trying to figure out what to do with the Pokemon Snap sequel and what features to expand upon, I think there's one feature that would quickly come to my mind. The end of the first game had you trying to get a shot of Mew. This was an entire level dedicated to that one task, and you had to hit Mew with pester balls, in order to get it out of its force field and close enough for a good shot. It was the game's equivalent of a boss battle, and you actually had to figure out how to get even a basic shot. So, what should they do for a Pokemon Snap sequel? More of these boss battles. And I'm happy to say that's exactly what they did. I'll only show the first one here to avoid spoilers, but there's a good handful of them throughout the game. Heading into their lairs and discovering which species of Pokemon they are is a thrill, and the music is always very enchanting and mysterious. For a few moments, it really makes it easy to immerse yourself in the fantasy of being a daring Pokemon photographer heading into a weird place to find something cool. My one disappointment here is that a few of these bosses, as I'll continue to call them, are a little too easy to get pictures of, as with this Meganium here. These bosses are at their best when they take some effort. I'd say the last few are probably the strongest encounters. The game's final sequence and the events leading up to it are quite magical. Finally, let's talk about presentation. New Pokémon Snap is a nice looking game. I know I'm an outlier here because most people feel that it's simply gorgeous. I think it's good, but not like that good. It's not breathtaking. It's certainly a heck of a lot better than Sword and Shield, though that's not saying much. The levels are short and you're on a fixed path, so the devs were able to create a lot of isolated, scripted visual elements and really focus on what the player can see from their relatively limited view. So that does make for some really nice sights. But I think my main problem is that it's a little uneven. The world design is delightful, the color really pops, everything is just very vibrant and fun to take in. But then some elements like water and foliage are very rigid and artificial. Some of the texture work is extremely good, like on certain rocky surfaces, but then sometimes it's only serviceable. Some Pokemon have really fun animations, but then others are pretty stiff and uninteresting. It's like the game looks best when you pull back and look at the whole, but not quite as beautiful when you start inspecting individual elements. Really though, like I said, it does look nice overall. Moving through the world is undoubtedly pleasant, with such fun environments and so many Pokemon to see. Pictures themselves end up looking super good. The UI is really slick, especially during the evaluation process. It's fun to compare it to the original and see just how far we've come even with stuff like that. Though on menus and loading screens and even during some cutscenes, the frame rate can dip and spike kinda wildly at times. It's not a big deal because it doesn't affect the gameplay, but it's a little strange. Speaking of cutscenes, there's not a lot to see here. The characters mostly interact through simple dialogue boxes, and actual cutscenes are usually so brief that it's almost weird that they're there at all. The ones that introduce you to the boss Pokemon are pretty cool though. The game's music is really nice. It does an extremely good job of feeding into the magical feeling of what you're doing, especially in boss encounters, as I mentioned earlier. Can you tell I really like the bosses? Whatever you're doing, the music always gives you just the right amount of brightness when appropriate, dipping into slightly more mysterious and eerie tones when the character themselves would naturally feel a little more trepidation, such as when traveling somewhere more dangerous. Overall, the entire soundtrack works overtime to instill a sense of wonder and magic. It wants you to feel like this is real. You're really in this world observing these amazing creatures. Pokémon Snap shares a very advantageous trait with the mainline games that inspired it. The core formula is loads of fun. I've said this about Pokemon before. No matter what a mainline Pokemon game is like, it's going to be at least a certain amount of fun because the basic premise is very engaging. Pokemon Snap is the same. Strip away the specifics, all the features and the story and basically everything. The simple concept of moving through the world of Pokemon and snapping pictures is delightful. When the first game launched, it was a very weird and experimental concept, but when you get in that little floaty car and you start seeing Pokemon and hitting that shutter button, it immediately just works. And with the music and the short courses that you slowly float through and all the scripted spectacles that play out exactly as you go by, well, I don't think it's any accident that it feels like an amusement park ride. And perhaps that's one reason it's so effective. It's an experience that's meant to wow you and just make you feel nice at every turn. Its primary goal is to show you some cool stuff, and even when the situation is maybe a little bit scary, like when a Pokemon is roaring at you or you're hovering over lava, you always know that you're completely safe. In New Pokémon Snap, heading into a new course, or a new variant of a course, is something that happens relatively infrequently, seeing as the courses are so short and most of your playtime is spent replaying them to hunt down new stuff. And yet that experience of pushing into a brand new place and having no idea what Pokemon you'll see is just thrilling. Mix that amusement park feel and sense of mystery with the nostalgia that comes from Pokemon just being Pokemon, and you've got a relatively simple but very impactful experience. Another bit of critical honesty before closing out though. Apart from issues with the request system, as a sequel to Pokemon Snap, this game is perfect. It widens the scope, adds content, develops mechanics, introduces a great sharing system, and looks really good on modern hardware. As a sequel 22 years and 4 console generations later though, there is a small part of me that wishes it was just a bit more. I suppose it's because, like I said, that core formula is so good, it's kind of frustrating that it took this long to get our basic sequel. Mechanically, beyond the ease of sharing online, this game could have been on the GameCube or the Wii. And they could have easily done one of these every Pokemon generation if they wanted to, or at least every 2. Molygrew did end up connecting with that unicorn, but I have to wonder how the encounter would have gone if it had shown up earlier like she wanted. New Pokemon Snap does exactly everything it needed to do as a sequel, and no more. My expectations were high enough that even meeting that level makes it a success, but I can only hope it doesn't take another 20 years to get Pokemon Snap 3, or else it's going to be a little harder to accept exactly enough. Let's not end on a critical note though, because that's a relatively minor thing. At the end of the day, when I pick up new Pokemon Snap, I have a lot of fun with it. The concept is great, it's executed almost perfectly, replayability is great, especially if you're the patient and or score chasing type, and it's just fun to look at a whole bunch of Pokemon. Oh, how I long for a VR Nintendo system. And that is that. If you would be so kind, please head down to the comments and tell me your thoughts on new Pokemon Snap. Is it the perfect sequel? Did it let you down? Are you a newcomer who's surprised that taking pictures of Pokemon can be this fun? Or do you not really know what all the fuss is about? But most importantly, whatever your opinion might be sure to include a camera or picture pun. I mean, you got it. Just keep them coming, people. If the whole comment section isn't filled with them, I'm gonna be sad.